It's really exciting that we're entering into this new series, taking us through Lent up until Easter. And before I actually start to talk about the subject today, I'm just going to really briefly do a little introduction to the series. Those of you who might have been there at Big Sunday last week, Ali gave a great overview to the series, but if you didn't catch that, then I'll just quickly sort of whiz us through the aims of Open Hands and Open Hearts. So really the heart of this series is that we want to help everyone to understand what giving is, what generosity is, and what stewardship is, and how that fits into becoming more like Jesus. And I was just really reminded this week that, we really believe that God has made each and every person in his image. What we struggle with as people is the likeness bit. So we're all born in God's image. We've all got that imprint of God in each and every one of us. And as we go through our life and as we allow God into our life, hopefully we become more like him. So we're hoping that through this series, we become more like him. We're using a vocabulary of treasure, talents and time. You might have heard Abby say that already. And when we talk about those things, we're meaning the resources that we have. Next slide. I'm multitasking here today. We're talking about the resources that we've got as disciples of Jesus. And also that we know we've got areas of our lives as well that are under spiritual pressure and temptation. We also want to be people who have freedom in our finances. That's one of the aims of this series, is that we hope that going through this series that we help people to feel a little bit more free in how you control your money, what you do with it. And we're also using the 10 Commandments to our real and everyday lives. The 10 Commandments are amazingly good guidelines for living, which help us to become more like him. So when we talk about giving, we're talking about the spiritual discipline of making sure that we give back to God what is his, and that we're also able to respond to his prompting to give. When we talk about generosity, we're talking about our state of heart, so that hopefully we've got hearts that are submitted to him, to his love, and that we are secure in his provision. Like we were just saying, it's really easy to hold on to stuff. We want to be people who have open hands. Because we've got open hearts, we've got open hands, and that we find it, that we're not fearful, that we can give away easily. And I think we'll find, and we know this by being part of a community, that if we cultivate generosity, it's catching. And you get loads of growth. You get amazing stories. I was saying to Abby, remembering actually this time last year, that we really encouraged people in the congregation to tell us stories. If you've gone ahead and done one of those challenges with the 40 acts, and something's happened, most likely you'll find it's probably you that's been blessed more, because you might have done something in secret and you've got no idea what that other person has felt about your gift. But please do be willing over the next few weeks to share stories, because that's what we want to hear. We want to hear that generosity is catching. So when we talk about stewardship, we're talking about having the ability to manage what we've been given. So that might be our finances, it might be our stuff, it might be our time, it might be our bodies. How do we manage all those things that we've been given? So how do we steward all this stuff so that we can see the kingdom of heaven grow? When we talk about treasure, we're specifically talking about our money and our possessions. When we talk about talents, we're talking about our gifts, our skills, and our knowledge. And then when we talk about time, we're talking about our time outside of family and work. But I also think God probably wants to challenge us about some of the issues that relate to how we spend our time at work and possibly with our family. So I think it's going to be a little bit broader than that when we talk about time. So as I said, we're going to be using the 10 Commandments. We're in this series for 5 weeks, and we'll be using 2 of the commandments each week. So the financial commandments that I talk about today relate to the first 2 actual commandments in the Bible. So also, as it's already been said, you can follow along with getting the Prayer Works emails, which will hopefully support the series. A lot of the children's groups across the churches are following this series as well. So we're really hoping that it's a time where our whole church family are on the same page together, and that we take a really good journey. So that's just a little overview of where we're going. So let's move on to our first commandment. So our first commandment is put God before anything else. So when we relate that to the first commandment in Exodus 20 verse 3, that commandment is you must not have any other God but me. So what we're going to talk about is the first principle, that we give to God first. In the Bible, there's loads of references to the first fruits. If we look here in Proverbs 3 verse 9 to 10, it says to honor the Lord with your wealth and with the best part of everything you produce. Then he will fill your barns with grain, and your vats will overflow with good wine. God isn't asking us to give to him because he needs it. Everything belongs to him anyway. But he's asking us to give to him first, so that as we actually honor him first, he can provide for us and bless us. Now, you probably know there's so many stories in the Bible where this principle of first is used. You may remember that Jericho was asked to be the first city that was given back to God. Isaac had to give his first promise. Abraham, he was asked to give his firstborn. And I was really struck by this story, actually, that Abraham had been given a promise by God, hadn't he? That he was going to, his family was going to fill the earth. He was going to have descendants, as many as the stars in the sky. So he must have been very confused when God asked him to sacrifice his firstborn, because that would have seemingly been an end. How was that promise going to come true? But Abraham named the place where God provided the lamb as Jehovah Jireh. Jehovah Jireh means God, my provider. So there's something there in that principle that if we are willing as people to offer back our first, that it's then in that instant that God shows powerfully, turns up, and shows his provision. I'm going to read you another story in the Bible that really powerfully demonstrates this. And it's from 1 Kings 17, verse 8 onwards, if you want to follow along. And it's where Elijah is asked to go to a widow. Then the Lord said to Elijah, "Go and live in the village of Zarephath, near the city of Sidon. I've instructed a widow there to feed you." So he went, and as he arrived at the gates of the village, he saw a widow gathering sticks, and he asked her, "Would you please bring me a little bit of water in a cup?" As she was going to get it, he called to her, "Bring me a bite of bread too." But she said, "I swear by the Lord your God, I don't have a single piece of bread in the house. I only have a handful of flour left in the jar and a little cooking oil in the bottom of the jug. I was gathering these sticks to cook my last meal, and then my son and I will die." But Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go ahead and do what you've said, but make a little bread for me first. Then use what's left to prepare a meal for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. There will always be flour and olive oil left in your containers until the time when the Lord sends rain and the crops go again." So she did as Elijah said. And she and Elijah and her family continued to eat for many days. There was always enough flour and olive oil left in the containers, just as the Lord had promised through Elijah. Now, I don't know about you, but this story is pretty amazing when it comes to God's provision. Now, I don't see any reason why God sent Elijah to a poor widow who was just about to eat her last meal. He could have sent Elijah to someone rich with plenty of food. Plus, did Elijah need to go somewhere to get looked after? I don't think so. Because we know from other stories in the Bible that God was more than capable of sending angels or ravens to feed the prophets while they were stuck out in the desert. God didn't need Elijah to be cared for. He sent Elijah to the widow because she needed to be taken care of. Elijah was sent to care. This widow, in making a choice to give to Elijah, so to give to God first, she must have been very afraid. In fact, I kind of think she probably went back to her house thinking, this guy's crazy. I just told him we were going to die. This is our last meal. And yet she gave that and brought it to Elijah. And it was at the point of where she opened her heart and her hands that released an incredible blessing in her life. So tithing and giving is actually for our benefit. It's not for God's benefit. It's for us. The widow had to give to God first. Her heart opened to God and to his goodness. And it's the same for us, that as we give, something happens in our hearts when we give. And God wants to fill our hearts with good things. I'm going to read you a verse from Malachi. It says, "Bring all the tithes into the storehouse, so that there will be enough food in my temple. If you do, says the Lord of heaven's armies, I will open the windows of heaven for you. I will pour out a blessing so great you won't have enough room to take it in." And then I love this bit. He says, try it. Put it to the test. Don't just take it as it is. Actually try it. Do it. Put it to the test. This week, there's a couple of things that I've done from the 40 Acts. And it is amazing, isn't it, how if you just take a little challenge and you do something which you think might be seemingly small, that it can make a massive impact. So I woke up the other morning and I felt really strongly that I should take some flowers round to a lady who my mum used to know quite well when she lived here, and I don't see her anymore. And so I just knocked on her door in between running errands, and I stood there and I said, "Oh, these are for you." And she said, "Why?" And I just said, "Because you need to know that you're loved and you're thought of." And she just started to cry. And it was just lovely. I went into her house and just had a chat with her. And as I went away, I thought, you know what? I know she's been blessed, but I've been hugely blessed as well. It's a small thing. But in opening our hearts and our hands, God is up to all sorts. We're not doing it. He's not asking us to give to him first because he needs it. Everything belongs to God anyway. But he knows us. He knows we're made in his image, but in order to become more like him, something happens in us when we give back to him first. So what does this principle of first mean in relation to our treasure, in relation to our money? It means that God needs to be first in our money. It means that we need to give to God what is his first rather than at the end. Now, this really challenges our sense of security and comfort and maybe our fear, because possibly it'd be easiest just to pay our rent, pay our mortgage, pay our food, provide for our kids, put petrol in our car, and then see if there's anything left over at the end of the month and then bring it to church or send it somewhere. But what God is saying is, put me first. In putting me first, and the Bible says 10%, I was reading a lot about tithing, and in actual fact, I think the Israelites gave about 20 when we work out how many times they tithed. So 10's not too much. But it's the principle of that when we bring in our finances, when we look at our possessions, what we've got, let's give it back to God first. Let's not hold on to it, and let's try not to be afraid and not give God the leftovers. Let's honor him with what we have first. So what does first mean in relation to our talent? This is where we ask ourselves, does God have our best? Even the stuff that we do at church, the way that we give our talents to church, is Chris giving his time and his skills in worship leading just to church? Or is he examining his heart and saying, I'm actually doing this for you, God. I'm doing this for God. How are we using our talents at work and at home? Our whole lives are our worship. What does first mean in relation to our time? This is a tricky one, isn't it? Because there's so much pressure on our time. God needs to be our first in time. Do we give him the first minutes of our day? Even just as you wake up and lie in bed, just acknowledge that this day is his. Ask him to be first in your day and to guide you through what you do and how you spend your time. And then he will bless it for you. That is a promise of God's, that if we give back to him first, he will bless our treasure and our talents and our time. We're going to move on to the second commandment now. I've just put my paper completely the wrong way. Wrong direction, Katie. So we're moving on to the second commandment here, which is don't try to get happiness through material things. So if we link that to the 10 Commandments, that's the second one, which is Exodus 20, verse 4, and it says you must not make an idol of any kind. So what's idolatry, we say? Well, it's honoring anything in this world above God. And material things can get in the way, can't they? I think we all know that. Material things can become a real idol in our lives when we look to them to provide happiness and joy. So what are the idols of 2018? I mean, there are so many good things, aren't there, out there in the world? They're not all necessarily bad. Really, really good things that bring lots of good stuff into our lives can still sneak in and actually take the place of God. I found this picture. I want more, I want more. How much does that say about our society today? It's incredible, isn't it? The pressure on us to want more. I was reading actually that most items that we purchase nowadays have got about a 6-month shelf life before you'll be bombarded with the advertising for the next model. And that goes with anything, doesn't it? Toys that the kids want, 6 months later, they want something else. I want more. I want more. And there's a verse in the Bible which says that the eyes of man are never satisfied. Now we're always looking for the next thing to fill us up. I don't know if any of you have ever played the logo game. Has anyone played the logo game? See if I mentioned it. You have? Guess the logo or something like that. There's also an app you can get on your phone. My kids were obsessed with it a couple of years ago. And I was thinking about it again this last week, and I was thinking, it is pretty crazy. My kids used to sit there, and you have to move through all these different levels. The amount of logos that we know, and we are bombarded with advertising and stuff we need to get, the next thing. It's crazy, isn't it? My kids, every now and then, I don't know if yours are anyone's into Pokemon cards. They've been around a long time, I know. But every now and then, my kids will be like, I want to buy some Pokemon cards. And apart from the price, I'm just like, oh my goodness, how much have you spent on Pokemon cards? And then you'll go into WH Smith, and they're all excited because they're going to get the new packet, and it could have the goodness knows what's. We need a Dawson here. They know loads about Pokemon. A really good card, a high one, a sparkly one, the ones that do really well. So they're all hyper about this, and then they open the packet, and within 10 seconds, it was a bit disappointing. And they're like, oh, can I get another one? And this pressure is real, isn't it? It's real that you could be so excited about something, you get it, and then the novelty wears off. What are we moving on to next? I just liked this. Are we defined by the big corporations, the stuff we want to buy? Because true joy comes from a relationship with Jesus. We often think if I had a better job or a better car or a better house, or I could afford to go somewhere nicer on holiday, then I'll just be happier. But it's actually a lie. There's a great quote here from Rick Warren, which says, the drive to always want more is based on the misconceptions that having more will make me more happy, more important, more secure, but all three ideas are untrue. Because possessions only provide temporary happiness. Because things do not change, we eventually become bored with them, and we want newer, bigger, better versions. So true, isn't it, that quote? It really makes you think. I know Ellie's going to talk a little bit more about this next week, but the Israelites were given manna in the desert, weren't they? And when they complained, God gave them meat. Before they'd even finished swallowing and chewing the meat, they were complaining again. And isn't that so often so true of us? So how does idolatry show up in our life? Oh, here's another one I had. You need this thing. Everyone else has one. It will change your life. So I'm going to buy it now. And then you've just got this thing, and the cycle goes on. So in our lives, it shows up that we need a new purchase to be happy. In terms of your talent, It might be that you think, I'm not doing something that I really want to do, so therefore I'm unhappy. In relation to your time, it'll most likely be that you're stressed by time, you don't feel in control of it, so therefore you're anxious. Being anxious might just be a sign that there's something in your life that is taking the place of God. So how does all this impact our giving? Like I said at the beginning, giving is the first fruit. Everything belongs to God. It's not ours. How does it impact generosity? Generosity is an act that helps us to enjoy more of God's love, and at the same time, it reaches out to other people. And how it impacts stewardship is that it's not all ours, it's all God's. So whether it's your home, whether it's your family, your car, the coat you're wearing today, the food you're going to eat, the holiday you're going to go on, all of these things that we've been given are ours to use really well, to use wisely, and to use it for God's glory. So I think there's a real challenge today, as Abby referred to earlier. Do we have faith and do we really trust in a God who is a provider? Is God your Jehovah Jireh? Are we going to let him into those situations where we feel nervous and we feel uncomfortable? And let's face it, money and finances is a really big one, typically for Brits, because like Abby said, we don't really like talking about it. And we need to get better at talking about it, because Jesus talks about money loads in the Bible, more than lots of other stuff. And money can be something that really trips us up. If we don't get it right in our head about how God wants us to think about money and our possessions and our stuff, then it's going to trip us up. And we want to be a community who know that what God's given us, whether it's financial, whether it's a talent, whether it's a treasure, whether it's your time, that we acknowledge that it's from God, from this incredible God who provides for us and is so generous for us. And that if we can get that right, if we can get this principle of that we want to give that back to God first, that it can be so powerful, that it can be catching, that we can be known as a community of people, and that we can be known as a center, even physically, we can be known as a center where this place is full of generosity. And that only comes if we're a people who are so in love with a God who provides for us, and that we trust him